Embracing your body feels good.
And it's good for you.
This is a podcast for parents to help you help your kids.
To embrace their bodies so they can be who they are in a world that tells them otherwise.
This is the Embrace Your Body podcast with Taryn B.
And Dr. Z.
We acknowledge that we are recording this podcast on the traditional country of the Ghana people, and we pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. So I think that title begged to be wrapped.
I'm not wrapping anything. Not promising anything.
Anyone who heard me say Taryn B and Dr. Z and I practiced that last night, would say it needs to be wrapped. But I am sitting here with someone who's highly intelligent and I am just going to not wrap today.
No, it's not about that. It's my hands don't do the thing. I'm just not cool enough to do the thing.
We are so excited to be here. This is a huge opportunity to get into the ears of parents all over the world to spread the message of embrace into their hearts, into their minds, into their homes, and to pass on to their kids.
It's just so important because there's just this universal feeling, that sense of feeling ashamed of your body or less than because of the way you look. And I know we've felt that, and we know so many other people out there have felt that. And it's that shame and that pressure, and we know the impact that it's had on us. I mean, it's cost us as a collective group so much, and we want something different for our kids.
I think for us, we have experienced the trauma, the pain, the loss of time, the worry, the anxiety. We have just, it's so palpable to me even just today, even though I've been embracing my body for a number of years now, I can still slip back into the feeling of that trauma. And it's just something that we don't want for our kids. We want them to reach their full potential. We want them to go out into the world and focus on who they are and how they feel and what they do and not worry, because our bodies are not something to be worried about.
And I guess what I feel from parents is this wanting to protect them from this crushing sense that you should somehow change who you are and what we look like in order to fit in. We just want them to feel confidence and to reach that full potential.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to feel overwhelmed as a parent. And for anyone who's listening, I guess what we didn't want to do is add to the to-do list. We wanted to make you feel seen and feel comfortable. We want to give practical strategies and top tips. Top tips can be so naff sometimes, I think. Like, here's top 10 tips to do, but we need them because we've got a lot going on.
Yeah, and if you're going to commit time to listening to this podcast, watching something, you want to be able to implement something straight away from that. But I feel like we should probably tell everyone who we are and why we're here.
And it's not about rapping. Is that fair?
It's not because of your superior, what is that, beatboxing?
Do you know what? I'm going to listen back to this podcast and regret doing that.
Yes, you will.
I already regret it.
Yeah. So I'm going to introduce you because, Taryn, you have one of those impressive bios that people have that mentions Google and all of these awards and all of the things. And your impact in this area has just been so huge. I mean, not many people can say that their message has reached 200 million people around the world, right?
My breasts.
It's pretty impressive.
In that first film, sorry. That's how I interpret it. Like, it's like, yeah, it's really impressive. But I'm like, I think a lot of people have seen my breasts. And if you've seen the first film, do you know? And I don't get around just with my breasts out, but I did expose them in the film. So when you say 200 million people, I'm like, oh my gosh, a lot of people have seen my breasts.
But that's not the extent of your impact. The first film was seen by so many people around the world, and now you have this potential with Embrace Kids to really spread that message to the next generation.
Well, thanks. That's lovely. And I guess for anyone listening who haven't heard of Dr. Zali Yager, I have to say that just being in your presence and surrounding myself with you and being like, yeah, I'm working with Dr. Zali Yager actually makes me a smarter person. Just by association, you make me look good and smart. So, but you, and the reason is because you've had 15 years working as an academic and trying to work out what works in this space. And you have broken, it's the only way to describe this, right? You have broken out of academia and you've sort of been unleashed onto the world. And thank goodness, because whilst you've got all of that expertise and you're now bringing it to the front line in a way that I think has been missing in the world. Gosh, you've written over 50 papers 50 published papers.
Yeah.
Look at you, just for those of you who can't see us, but let me just say, like, Zali's giving me that look like, yeah, like 50. Or was there more?
Well, you've got 3 books. So.
But I guess I just want everyone to know that from my perspective, it's a real privilege to work with you. And yeah, we know a thing or two about body image.
We sure do. So between us, we've got, 30 years. Let's add it up. Why not? Combined experience in sort of this research and advocacy and education about this topic, really. But we also know that there are so many questions out there that are yet to be answered and so much information that doesn't get to the people who need it. But also between us, I think we have to count in our credentials. We have 6 kids and know the challenges of trying to seek and gain parenting information when you need it in ways that's fast but accessible. And that's why we wanted to get into your ears, listeners.
Zali, you didn't tell me you were going there, but I like it. Do you see what she did there with their voice, everybody?
When we talked about doing this, because we have 6 kids and we are often overwhelmed by that, I feel like having 3, I feel like I have much more than 3 kids. Like it just feels like a lot sometimes. And so we wanted to be really clear that this is a podcast for parents, but it's not a parenting podcast. We're not parenting experts. Just want to make that really clear. Because
I feel so much relief that you've brought that up.
Because so many parenting experts actually sometimes make me feel like shit.
Yeah, and it's all packaged up in a way that is just, it's too neat and tidy, and it just doesn't get through. Because I think it often feels, well, I often read some of these parenting expert books and guidelines and talks and masterclasses and all the things. I've tried them all. I'm still the parent I am and was. But I often just feel this overwhelm and pressure, and I give myself such a hard time for not doing half of the things. And half of the things I couldn't implement with my kids.
Yeah.
And we should probably talk about our kids' ages. So just so there's some context there, I have a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and I have a stepson who's 10. And you've got?
Yeah, so I've got a 9-year-old and 2 7-year-olds.
I feel like we've covered off this parenting space like pretty well. Like
we've got a good span there.
We've got a great span.
Yeah, and that's really the age that we're talking about. This information is sort of relevant for everyone in the parenting space, but really in that school age, I guess, is where all of this stuff starts to come out much more than before. So, yeah, I just think that we're here to try and talk about the issue, to talk about some things that you can try, but there is no right and wrong, and it's not about getting it right, and it's not about ticking it off. It's just about trying, doing something.
100%. And I think my favourite quote is by Steve Furtick, who says, "Don't compare your behind the scenes with someone else's highlight reel." And so often we do, and we feel like a massive failure. I have to tell you a quick story because I think it's going to make everyone feel really good about themselves if I share this story. A few years ago, I was taking the kids to see Aquaman at the cinemas, and it was in a shopping centre. So, of course, I was like, we're all going to a shopping centre. I need to go to Adairs and get some linen. And so I'm like, kids, just let me have 5 minutes of time in Adairs, and then I'll buy your popcorn and do whatever I have to do to keep you happy. And
nice bribe.
You know when you're shopping with kids and there was a little bit of jostling going on, but it wasn't to the point where someone would look at me like you're a bad mum. It was right on the edge though, let me tell you. And I turned my back, and next minute I heard my eldest son scream, and I looked over as he took his hand from his head to allow the blood to splurt out all over the Egyptian cotton sheets and towels, like the display bed.
To be the linen, yeah.
My younger son had, when they were jostling, he didn't realise, because I'm a tight-ass mum and I take water bottles to the cinema, that one of my very heavy metal water bottles was in a calico bag, and he had picked it up to swing it just as a fun, but it swung onto his head and split his head open. And it was so funny the moment I'm like, oh shit! Okay, I went to go help my son, but then I'm looking at the Adairs people, and they were freaking out and young, going, I don't know there's no rule book for this. Yeah. And then I saw the lady telling people to leave the shop and stopping people from coming in the shop. And next minute there was an ambulance, and we had to go to hospital. It was a whole thing. I haven't actually shared that story before, but I just want to really set the tone for this podcast that
Yeah.
Man, there's shit going down that people aren't sharing. We are messy.
Yeah.
And it's going to be okay.
You can't put that on Instagram. There's just no way to capture the mess sometimes. To even if you wanted to try and share it, sometimes you can't even put it together. But yeah, I love that story.
I bet you've got a few.
I do. You know, I just feel like it's so hard to take your kids anywhere, right? And this is the thing, I just think you're so, you know, trying to take them into a shop before a cinema is like next level planning. Having 3 kids, it's very hard to get to the dentist. And I was feeling, you know, particularly proud of myself one day for actually just making it there and taking all 3 children to the dentist, which is what you're meant to do as a parent. And then, you know, the dentist is like checking their teeth and starts to notice that my daughter needs some silver caps on her teeth. But, you know, rather than being like, oh, you know, I just feel like there's so many ways she could have put that, but it was like, why aren't you flossing their teeth every night? And I'm like, I've got 3 children. They've each got, 20 teeth? Like, I'm not doing 60 flosses each night. Because, like, if she saw what bedtime looked like at our place, like, she wouldn't even try to mention it. But she's like, you know, leaning them back on her special chair and giving them the flossing, you know, doing this flossing thing. See, it's so easy. And I'm like, yeah, in your chair that tips them upside down while they don't have anywhere else to go, and you're going to bribe them with some toy afterwards. So she made me feel really bad about it. And I think this is, you know, with our intention for this podcast as well. It's like making me feel bad about it didn't actually help in the long run.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I spent a lot of money on like this special flossing tool, but we only did it for like 2 nights and then we went back to normal. And so that shame really didn't encourage me to change my behaviour. And, you know, I still just congratulate myself that they brush every now and then, let alone floss. But we were just really keen not to make people feel bad about maybe things they've done up until the point that they've listened to this podcast, or like if you try something and then it doesn't work, like don't feel bad about that.
So true. You only know what you know.
Yeah.
And hopefully through the podcast you're going to know a whole heap more. But what would be a real crying shame is to take thoughts of shame about what you've not done in the past into your future. It's almost like, let's just draw a line in the sand. Whatever happened at Adair's, no one needs to talk about. Let's ice to the front, everybody. Let's go to the movies.
Did you go afterwards?
I was in the hospital.
You were in the hospital? Okay.
And my poor son was about to start high school a few days later and they're like, we're really sorry, we're going to have to shave his head. And he was devastated as much as I've tried to not make it about how you look with my kids, but my son's like, but my hair. Like, I'm like, oh my God.
So sweet. No feeling shame, because I think, and we're going to talk about this, is in the past when we didn't know these things, we've done some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. Maybe you shouldn't do that anymore, you know? So we're not just talking about our parenting fails here. We are talking about a film that you've created, Embrace Kids. And I'm really keen just for you to share what made you want to make this film? Because I know it's been challenging.
I like the way you say challenging. What, the film that tried to take my soul? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Well, I say that because it was obviously a beautiful film to make, that it was just very hard to make in the conditions that we did with COVID. And it was also really important, you know, we worked on the film together to make sure it was safe and effective for kids at the same intersection as let's make something creative and tell stories without telling stories that scare kids or it was a whole thing. But I think originally it came about because after all those people had seen the first film, Embrace, which was released in 2016, the number one piece of feedback that I had from people was, I wish I had seen this film when I was younger. Yeah. And then I spent a whole bunch of time in schools showing the film, doing Q&A, speaking to kids, and it just felt like we were talking to them too late. Yeah. Like some of those girls and boys at 14 and 15 had hated their body for 5, 6, 7 years. So, yeah, that's the why behind why we made Embrace Kids.
And it's a film for kids, aimed at kids, but it's also kind of for parents, right? So what do you hope parents will get out of it?
There are 18 incredibly smart, intelligent, witty, funny, inspiring kids in this film that made me want to be a better person on the planet. And my hope for adults and parents who see this film is Well, a sense of responsibility as well. I want them to feel like, oh my gosh, I know how it feels to have hated my body and I don't want this for my kids.
Right.
And what I say and do matters in the future. So I'm going to do the right thing by the types of kids we see in the film. Because it's really hard to look at them and look into their eyes and hear their stories and their hopes and their dreams and their, what's the word? It's pure. Like how they're looking, how some of the younger kids look at the world is pure. And how dare we come along and mess it up for them? We need to be the role models for them. And so I want parents to see this and feel, hope and inspiration, but feel some responsibility too, that we need to do the right thing.
I think that parents can also learn a lot from the film in terms of, it's really nice when you see something and then that helps you to then bring those messages in at home. And so for that reason, I think we sort of created these 4 key messages that would sort of filter and flow throughout the film, but they're also sort of the 4 key things and your go-to points at home. And I just always have these 4 things in my mind whenever things come up in our house or whenever I'm trying to, whenever people are asking me for top tips, I usually go to these 4 points. And so I thought we'd just quickly run through them today, and then it's kind of what we're going to go through in the rest of the podcast as well, is a deep dive on each of these 4 areas.
Yeah, and the first area being celebrate diversity. It's actually so simple and it's actually a beautiful thing to do because in the world when we walk down the street, there are so many different colours and different shapes of bodies and ethnicities and abilities of bodies, and it's beautiful. Like diversity is beautiful.
And it's something that you can just point out everywhere you go. Even with really young kids, it's like, oh, look at all these different flowers, and when they all come together, it makes a beautiful garden. And look at all of these different bodies and strengths in the in the team or whatever. It just comes up so much, and I think you can bring it in. You don't have to get out your PowerPoint slides and your whiteboard in order to teach some of this stuff to your kids. It can just come up naturally. But also when we're talking about diversity, then it gives you that opportunity to really point out the special and unique things about each individual that need to be there in order for there to be diversity.
Yeah, how boring would the world be if we were all the same?
Exactly. So then it's about, what are the special and unique things about you and how do you really value those things because they are special and different instead of thinking that you have to fit in. So the second main, theme point pillar is to focus on functionality. And this is something that I think if you don't do anything else in terms of body image with your kids, if you can just make them realise the amazing things that their body does, that really helps people to worry less about the way that they look because they're focused on what their body is doing.
Oh, it's so true. And this is one of the I get so excited when I talk about functionality of body because I actually think we've forgotten how spectacular, incredible, amazing our bodies are. Like you see the slogans, our bodies are amazing. Our bodies are amazing.
Yeah.
They digest, they regulate temperature. You get a cut, it heals. When you're sick, you heal. You can move, run, jump, even just seeing and hearing and touching and just the way that our hearts beat just without us even thinking. Like we put so much emphasis on our butts. Like, how does your butt look? How does your heart beat, everybody? Can we just, it's our function is something that sometimes I think we just take for granted.
Yeah. And it's something that, again, you can just raise awareness of throughout every moment or moments in the day. Isn't it awesome that our bodies can do this? Isn't it amazing? Like when you're cuddling with your kid, isn't it great that our bodies let us do this together and snuggle on the couch? Isn't it amazing that when they've been sick or, we've just had a little bit of a time with COVID, isn't it amazing that your body just fought off that virus like superheroes do, So I think it's something that we can bring into everything. The third point there is being kind to yourself, and this is something that I'm pretty big on. And this is something in general, people have this misconception that they have to be really critical of themselves because it's going to make them do better and try harder and be stronger. And I think that's something that's kind of a leftover from when we were growing up as well. We now know through all of the science is that just being kind to ourselves or even just being less critical on ourselves is incredibly beneficial for our mental health and can really boost, mental health, but it also transfers across to body image because if we're being less critical on ourselves generally or less critical about our own bodies, then that's going to help us accept and appreciate them more. And the last one there is recognising real role models. So we know that the media and now social media has such a huge impact on the way that we feel about our bodies and ourselves. And this is often the thing when I talk about body image, people go, oh, social media, it's causing everything.
Don't they just? Wouldn't it just be easy if we had to fix this one problem?
I know, just like switch it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, it's here, we're going to live with it. And it's, something that we can learn to manage. And we actually have a lot of power over, more power than, the magazines that were around when we grew up. So it's something that we just have to sort of weave into the conversation and teach our kids that, if we love social media, it's about exposing ourselves to more positive things. And in most cases, that's like a wide range of different sorts of bodies so that you can see this incredible diversity that exists out there, or to look at less bodies, more dogs, more travel photos, more food, bloggers.
Cat videos are highly underrated. I wasn't a cat person until my partner had two, and now his whole algorithm is cats, which makes me really happy. I'm like, you're like a cat man as opposed to a cat woman. He's just into cats. And every night it's like, look at this video, look at this video. Yeah. And if that's our experience with social media, it's for us as adults, we're popping on every now and again and we're just laughing our asses off at what these cats can do. Like a cat got on a horse yesterday, in last night's episode. That's how it feels at home.
No, that's a real role model.
That's right. I should tell him. But our experience is quite a positive one. And I'm actually really glad that we tackled that in the film the way we did, because sometimes we just want to go, here's the problem, and let's just demonize and make this the problem being social media, and it doesn't get us anywhere. And I think the acceptance that it's here to stay, it's actually not going to go anywhere, and let's live with it, actually makes me feel better as a parent, because otherwise before it felt like David and Goliath, I'm never going to win the battle. Yeah. And now it's just a small, I'm not going to use the word pivot because I did that in 2020. But, it's just a slight tweak in how I consider that screen time that makes me feel more empowered as a parent.
Yeah. And not about controlling it, but about, learning using it as a teaching opportunity and a moment where you can really unpack some of the things that they're seeing. Why, we use it to teach media literacy. Why would they have used that person, and why did they do that thing? What are they trying to sell us here? It's an opportunity to raise some of those questions and get young people to critique it for themselves.
So they are the 4 key messages, and we're going to do a deep dive on each of those pillars throughout this podcast. Yeah. I think overall we are wanting to inspire kids for action so that they realise that their bodies are actually the least interesting thing about them. That's what we're here, and this is what we're hoping to do. Yeah. But it's going to come back to us as parents and what we say and do and how we role model. But the main message is that your worth has nothing to do with your weight or how you look. All bodies are good bodies, and everyone is worthy of respect and love, regardless of how they look. And that is the end of our very first episode of a podcast ever.
We did it.
We have been asked to do a podcast, Zali, for 10 years by many people, and we've never done it because we've been not too scared, but
you've been asked to a podcast. No one asked me to do anything.
That's because you've been locked up in a university, but now you're out. But I'm proud. I hope everyone who listened got something from that. And until next time, is that what they say on a podcast?
No, probably not.
Oh. Sorry, everybody. I will not do that for the whole podcast, I promise.
For more information, get your hands on our book, Embrace Kids. And for free resources, visit theembracehub.com.